its exceptional location, through its 13th century history, the Mont Saint Michel Abbey, known throughout the world, is a unique monument of its kind. Classified as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Mont Saint Michel dominates an immense bay, on one side Normandy, on the other Brittany. In this natural amphitheater, the tide renews the landscape twice a day. A dazzling communion between nature and the fruit of human ingenuity. How did Mont Saint Michel, a mosaic of different architectural styles, become such a coherent and harmonious monument? How did this monastery, a major place of pilgrimage in the Middle Ages, acquire such fame over the centuries? Even today, this masterpiece of Christian architecture arouses an incredible fascination. Every morning at dawn, before the influx of visitors, the Office of Lauds is celebrated in the presence of the monks and nuns who live on the mount. These times of prayer within this historic monument, among the most visited in France, contribute to the building's sacred dimension.
The sacred, I think, is everything that rises. So architecture will contribute to this elevation. Here in this construction of Mont Saint Michel, it is something that rises. And it has been built, progressively, epoch after epoch, encompassing things from earlier times. The monument is built on rock, and also the rock of faith of all these builders. A sacred monument is something that will help man, help each of us to go higher, to go further, to go beyond the everyday without denying it.
This sacred monument was built in a place that was not chosen at random. Before the 8th century and the first Christian constructions, the rock was probably a pagan site, already considered sacred. The Celts called it Mount Tomb. Arnaud Guérin is a geologist. A native of the region, he became passionate about the Bay of Mont Saint Michel, this immense expanse where another rock rises, this one completely bare.
The islet of Tombelaine is a good example to represent what Montombe was, what we call today Mont Saint Michel, before all the stages of construction of everything man did on this rock. But it is also a very good image of what granite peaks are, which is to say, a mountain range that existed here 600 million years ago, which is called the Cadomian Range, Cadomius in Latin, which signifies the name of the city of Caen. We had mountains as high as the Alps or Himalayas, which is completely out of place when you think about it. And granite baubles surfaced out of these mountains. It is either islands or mounts which dominate this whole area of the Bay of Mont Saint Michel, and which is totally flat. And this environment, which is dominated above all by a powerful element, the tide, which is the great director of this exceptional environment. We have the third largest tides on the planet, meaning that here in the open sea, we have several meters of water. The difference in sea level in Mont Saint Michel Bay at the maximum point of the high tide is 15 meters, so it's absolutely huge.
The tide, the fog, the bay presented many dangers for the pilgrims of the Middle Ages, for whom the sea was an unknown and frightening element. But another phenomenon awaited them during the crossing.
This is what the scientists call thixotropy, or quicksand. It really is one of the perils. Indeed, it is the peril of the bay of Mont Saint Michel. It is locally known here as the Lys, or quicksand of the bay. There are legends of people who became stuck here. When the pilgrims crossed the bay, the first danger they thought of was, of course, this phenomenon, which is a simple scientific phenomenon. We compress the sediments, and then the water will rise and we will sink down. So the danger is, of course, to get stuck when the tide comes.
Despite all these deadly risks, the pilgrims attempted the crossing. After days and weeks of walking, this final step towards Saint Michel was to ensure their salvation in eternity. For the Archangel is the one who struck down the dragon, a symbol of the victory of good over evil. He weighs the souls and leads the chosen to heaven.
So this bay is really inseparable from Mont Saint Michel. Without understanding Mont Saint Michel Bay, we cannot understand what the monument is. At the beginning of the construction at Mont Saint Michel, the men will use the granite that is there. But they quickly run out of material and therefore will look for granite elsewhere, in Chausey. Chausey is 30 kilometers from here. It was only the tide which allowed the transport of these materials. In fact, we realized that the whole history of Mont Saint Michel, the genius in the way the men built, there is a symbiosis between these builders and their environment. They knew how to decipher wonderfully all the resources that were present in the bay of Mont Saint Michel.
Yesterday, like today, the bay is inseparable from the monument. More than a simple decoration, men have found strong symbols in all its natural resources.
One of the first ones is the shell. Here we have always fished for shells. It was a fishery that was only for women, whom we called red feet or blue feet, simply because they were like us here now, feet in the water with blood circulation problems. So their legs were blue. But these shells, they really symbolize the Miklo paths, which is the name of these pilgrimage paths. If we look at it, the shell is made up of ribs that all lead towards the same point, that is to say, towards the sanctuary. And there is another shell that is frequently found in Mont Saint Michel's bay. It's a shell of another bivalve called the Pholades, and they're called the wings of the Archangel. It is really associated with the cult of Saint Michel.
In the footsteps of medieval man, pilgrims continue the tradition and follow the paths of the Mount. It's St. Michael's Day, and this group has been walking for a week and are about to cross the bay.
We're in the mist. We often have moments when we're in the mist, or we don't know what decisions we're going to make. What I'm waiting for is for St. Michael to enlighten me in my everyday life, and I want to be driven by the right decisions. We still have options in our lives, and I want to take the voices that are positive to move towards a healing. You'll see when the sun comes out. St. Michael helps us with that, to be directed towards the light, to be positive. To know that there were so many people who traveled these paths, who went to Mont Saint Michel to look for something, to ask Saint Michel to grant them graces.
Walking gives you time. You can think, get a little in tune with where you're going.
To be a pilgrim is to accept to leave our shallow waters, to walk to the mountain. You arrived at the mountain after having made this beautiful crossing. You passed through the sea. You went across the river. You have joined the rock on which the house of God is built.
It is exceptional to have an abbey on a peak where the buildings, instead of being well arranged side by side, are one above the other. It's not very convenient for living. I even think it must be awful. But it gives momentum. It gives a great height. A lot of energy that carries you spiritually, because in the end, verticality is an important element. But here we also have horizontality. We have everything.
The constructions on the rock were assembled one after the other, even one on top of the other, gradually, century after century. To go back in time, you have to go down into the bowels of the abbey and follow historian François Saint-James to the area known as Notre-Dame sous terre, or Our Lady Underground.
This rock was left here on purpose, and we'll find it throughout the Romanesque Abbey. This piece of rock could have been blown up, but the builders dramatized it. Why? Because it was the Archangel who consecrated the rock. So they purposefully left it. The architecture has joined, even glued itself to this rock, which is in a way sacralized. The Church of Our Lady underground is the heart of the abbey.
About a dozen meters long, it is located under the nave of the abbey's church and bears witness to the origins of the monument.
This church, which is in the heart of Romanesque buildings, is the oldest part. It dates from the 10th century. It probably succeeded the first church, the 8th century church founded by Saint Aubert. Legend has it that a bishop of Avranches, at the request of the Archangel who appeared to him in a dream 3 times, founded a church in his honor. And this church copied an Italian sanctuary, the Monte Gargano in Apulia, which very quickly supplanted it and became in its turn the largest Eastern sanctuary dedicated to the Archangel.
In this legend of the origins of the mount, the Archangel must return 3 times to convince Aubert. And while insisting the 3rd time, he drove his fiery finger through his skull. In the 11th century, monks found a skull pierced with a hole on the rock. The mount finally had its relic. Indeed, the Archangel, made of pure spirit, could not leave a physical trace. The pierced skull indirectly became this miraculous proof necessary for the mount to become a great center of pilgrimage.
C'est une relique très importante.
It's a very important relic. This puncture wound also relates to fundamental texts such as the Apocalypse, which explains to believers that angels have the power to mark the foreheads of the chosen ones with their fingers, the chosen ones being the people who will have the right to enter paradise. This mountain in the middle of the sea will allow pilgrims to come into contact with the Archangel.
A relic, a place of pilgrimage, but also and especially a monastery. Benedictine monks invaded the rock in the 10th century, which is 2 centuries after the first constructions ordered by Aubert.
The Benedictine monks in the Middle Ages had a special status. They were both outside the world and they controlled the world, in effect. The Benedictines lived cloistered in the monastery, praying for the salvation of all the souls of their contemporary Lord, for the secular, of course, but also for simple peasants. Nevertheless, they were there to organize the economic policy of life in the area. They were therefore both outside of time and completely in touch with the life of the domains they controlled. For the monks of Mont Saint Michel, it was particularly important since all economic life around the bay on the Breton side, as well as on the Norman side, was in their hands. They were the ones who settled the matters of justice, who settled the economic questions of agricultural organization, who ran the mills, and who organized the fisheries.
Like the monks of the Middle Ages, In contact with the outside world, those who live on the Mount today have a mission with the public. Since 2001, it is no longer Benedictines, but the brothers and sisters of the monastic fraternities of Jerusalem who ensure this religious presence on a daily basis. The specific vocation of this community is to offer an oasis of peace in the heart of cities and tourist sites.
Sometimes people say to themselves, "Oh, that still exists." People don't know if we have dressed up specifically for the needs of the place, like in the Middle Ages, or if we're really like this in real life and whether we live here. The big question is, but you live here? So people are, and at the same time, they're surprised. And since we're not cloistered, they can still speak to us where they see us, up close and personal. Because in the chapel where we are, the faithful are right behind us. So they're very close to us and they love it. They're happy to be here. Even if they come as tourists, people who do not expect to find a community here are affected. They're a very diverse group of people. Some have the audio guide around their necks, they've come as visitors, and we extend both hands to them to give them the peace of Christ. So when they understand that we didn't just say hello, sometimes we say it in English, or we try to make them understand what it is, that it is the peace of the Lord that we transmit to them, which comes from the liturgy of the Eucharist. They're touched, they're moved to tears.
Today's monks and nuns are in keeping with their predecessors of the Middle Ages. Guardians of the spiritual life, they embody a continuity in the history of the monument. From the 11th century onwards, the Benedictine monastery had to expand to accommodate the growing number of pilgrims. It was then decided to build a church 80 meters long at the top of the rock. Historian and writer Henri Decon devoted his life to deciphering the history of the Mount.
Building a church at the top of a peak posed problems. It was necessary to create a horizontal platform on this point of the rock. And in order to obtain this platform and to build a church, it was necessary to reclaim the slope of the rock by building a whole set of crypts.
The construction site represents a technical tour de force, a dizzying feat. To create such a vast surface, it is necessary, first of all, to create an enormous substructure composed of 4 crypts distributed on the peak of the mountain. This Latin cross-shaped base inscribes Christ's Passion in stone.
Architecture. 11th century architecture is what we call Romanesque architecture. It is characterized by quite simple shapes, by a beautiful luminosity, because the absence of a vault made it possible to open many windows, a great sobriety, and the capitals in general represent mainly plant-like motifs.
Only the nave, which was originally twice as large, remains from the Romanesque period. For the history of the abbey is marked by destruction and reconstruction. An originality of the church, this Romanesque nave is assembled with a very different choir dating from another era. In the 15th century, the Romanesque choir collapsed and was completely rebuilt. It is a true flamboyant Gothic masterpiece whose construction lasted almost a century. Outside the Abbey Church, a group of monastic buildings was built in the 13th century to accommodate more than 60 monks. In barely 25 years, it became a true medieval skyscraper, which was built on the side of a rock, 2 bodies of buildings on 3 floors. The feat of this formidable achievement is such that since its origin, it has been called La Merveille, or the Wonder. One of the most emblematic rooms of the wonder is the vast and luminous refectory, where the monks ate their meals in silence.
When we enter this room, we don't see the windows, but we bathe in the light. And when we move forward, the wall disappears, and it is like a curtain of light. And this light, the only light of the day that the monks can eat in, so as to obey Saint Benedict's rule, it represents the Word of God. During the 30 minutes of the meal, a monk, the reader, also called the sommelier, reads the lives of saints. He reads in recto tono, reciting in a single tone. But the voice does not roll in the room, it hovers. If you read aloud, it sounds normal, it reverberates. But if you read recto tono, the speech responds to the light in this infinite horizontal way. So just to illustrate my point,
de la lecture de la règle de Saint Benoît au chapitre 41, des heures auxquelles les frères doivent prendre leur repas, depuis la Sainte Pâque jusqu'à la Pentecôte, les frères prendront leur réfection à la 6e heure et ils souperont le soir.
and this horizontal, it responds to light. That is what is extraordinary in this wall. Light and speech are one.
The staging of light, silence, isolation. Here, the whole architecture is at the service of the spirituality of the monks. Light, symbol of the divine presence, enters the room of the knights thanks to these large circular windows. Here in the middle of a library, monks studied sacred texts, but also the ancient philosophers. Xavier Bailly, administrator of Mont Saint Michel Abbey, knows all the rooms of the wonder by heart.
The wonder is neither in Mont Saint Michel nor the Abbey of Mont Saint Michel, but in reality a very spectacular building of a great singularity, which is the building which flanks the Abbey on its northern slope, and which constitutes probably one of the most beautiful, of the most extraordinary, hence its name of wonder, monastic architectural achievements of the Middle Ages.
Architectural monastique du Moyen Âge.
Mont Saint Michel, a monument of incredible historical richness, whose architecture of each era, of each room, is full of meaning and symbols.
Gothic architecture responds to a philosophy, and this philosophy is deeply marked by the philosophy of light. In the Abbey Church, the pilgrim comes from the west, where the sun sets. The officiant, the religious community, is in the choir to the east, where the sun rises. Following this thought, the sunrise is symbolically that of the resurrection, that all of humanity awaited in the Middle Ages. We are here in front of a Gothic architecture which is in a certain way the representation of the celestial Jerusalem. In other words, an architectural transcription of a thought and a philosophy in which, of course, light plays a considerable role.
In a few centuries, Mont Saint Michel has gone from being a monastery apart from the world to a wonder of Gothic style. By building such a masterpiece on the top of a rock surrounded by great tides, the monastic builders demonstrated a true act of faith. A jewel inseparable from its case, Mont Saint Michel embodies the unique encounter of a sumptuous natural setting with human genius.